The 90s and 2000s were a time of automotive excess, where the horsepower wars raged on and it seemed as though bigger and more powerful engines were finding their way into smaller and smaller cars. And when it came to the big cars, well, the engines just got bigger. Now it is worth noting I am mainly referring to the European manufacturers here. The Americans have always tended to just shove a V8 in basically everything, and while their cars were getting significantly more powerful in this period, still somewhat haunted by the ghosts of the Malaise era, it can hardly be considered a high watermark for American car building.
Looking at a Buick LeSabre.
God, don't.
It was rubbish when it was new, it was built by idiots, and it's rubbish now.
As for the Japanese, well, they were absolutely cooking with the cars they were coming out with, but their gentleman's agreement pegged things back at an alleged 280 horsepower, and meant that this phenomenon didn't really apply in quite the same way. But unbound by the more stringent emissions regulations that were to come, there was an incredible variety to choose from. And this was particularly true of the German manufacturers. So today we're going to look at some big-engined BMWs that arguably push things a little bit too far, because none of them made production. For no reason other than to render my intro completely moot, we're actually going to start in the 1980s with this, the E32 Generation 7 series. Launched in 1986, it came initially only with straight 6 power, but 1987 saw the introduction of a 5-litre V12 in the 750i and IL models, making it the first German car to feature a 12-cylinder engine since the Second World War. The choice to develop a V12 for the 7 series was not one taken lightly, as it meant 11th hour changes needed to be made to the car's design, thus delaying the launch by a year and costing a not insignificant sum of Deutschmarks. But it did give the car crucial bragging rights over its chief rival, the standard-bearing Mercedes S-Class, which itself would be delayed by 2 years in response to the 7 series and wouldn't receive a V12 under its bonnet for another 4. However, while all that was going on, BMW were thinking bigger. Literally. Because in mid-1987, as the 750i was going to market, 2 BMW engineers started working on a V16 engine dreamed up by Dr. Karl-Heinz Lange. The engine was completed by Christmas that year, and in 1988 it was inserted into this prototype 7 series, dubbed Goldfisch. According to BMW, the engine was a technical exercise to demonstrate the potential of the company's engine family, and indeed the V16 shares a lot in common with the M70 V12 from the 750iL that the Goldfisch was based on. Same engine block, same cylinder bore and stroke, just 4 extra cylinders, and now displacing 6.7 litres. Naturally though, introducing 4 extra cylinders and an entire foot in length to an already cramped engine bay was going to result in some compromises. The radiators had to be moved to the rear of the car, hence the fish-like gills on the side and full-length vent at the back to keep them cool, and as a result, the car had no boot. It also did about 9 mpg. But the end result was 408 horsepower and 461 foot-pounds of torque, increases of around 110 horsepower and 130 foot-pounds of torque respectively over the V12. And where the ordinary 7 Series had a 4-speed automatic gearbox, the Goldfisch used the 6-speed manual from the then brand new 8 Series Coupe. That meant 0 to 60 in 6 seconds and a theoretical top speed of 174 miles an hour. That was very impressive, doubly so for the 1980s, but if the car made production, it doubtless would have been held back to 155, especially as the E32 750i was the progenitor of that particular gentleman's agreement. Incidentally, one of BMW's stated reasons for not putting the V16 into production was as to not start an arms race with its fellow German manufacturers. However, they wouldn't completely put the idea to bed. Here is another E32 generation BMW 7 Series with a V16 engine. sort of. It definitely has a V16 engine, but the Beamer nerds amongst you may notice that it kinda looks like a mishmash of an E32 and the E38 generation that succeeded it. However, this prototype is from 1990, 4 years before the E38 came to market. Now that can be explained away by the fact that the Goldfisch 2 electric boogaloo was designed by the same man, who would later go on to pen the E38. But joke's on you, BMW nerds, because it's not actually a 7 Series at all, of any variety. Instead, it was allegedly a proposal for a model that could sit above the 7 Series in the BMW range, a potential 9 Series, if you will. And as a result, it is significantly longer than even a long wheelbase E32. In fact, its dimensions roughly mirror that of a modern day 7 Series, which says a lot considering how enormous cars have become in recent years. And although not confirmed, many signs point to a lot of the front section of the car at least, actually being lifted from the Rolls-Royce Silver Spur. However, this did mean that the V16 and all the required cooling gubbins could fit under the bonnet, without the crude fiberglass gills on the side like the original Goldfisch. The V16 itself was also different. Less aggressively tuned, and with a slightly smaller displacement, it made less power, around 350 horses, and this time sent to the rear wheels through a 5-speed automatic gearbox. Top speed was, you guessed it, 155. But arguably the most intriguing part about this prototype is the fact that BMW hid it from the outside world for 34 years, only revealing it at a BMW Group Classic event in 2024. Now, there could be a number of different reasons for that. Firstly, if revealed at the time, it could have given away some of the styling cues of the upcoming E38 Generation 7 series, and not to mention, by this point, they had a V12 that actually made more power than this V16. And then of course there was the prospect of that arms race I mentioned earlier. Mercedes were allegedly working on an 18-cylinder engine of their own in response to the original Goldfisch, but of course that also never happened. In the end, it was actually the VW group that got closest, with multiple W18 powered Bugatti concept cars in the late 1990s. And if you want to find out more about those, check out this video I did a little while ago. Oh, and while I'm doing the cheeky plugs, I might as well tell you that you can now become a Car Holly channel member from just 99p at the sorry I use an ad blocker tier. And you'll get some goodies like extra waffle that I couldn't fit in my original scripts and all that kind of stuff. Although, if you choose not to, then absolutely nothing will change because, quite frankly, what am I doing now? Waffling. So I'm just going to cut myself off. As far as BMW were concerned though, they would stick with a V12 engine for their top-of-the-line 7 Series until just a few years ago. After all, who could forget the BMW individual M760 Li xDrive model V12 excellence the next 100 years? Yeah, it's all well and good putting your biggest engine into your biggest car, but what about putting it into your smallest one? Well, that's exactly what BMW did back in 1999, although, once again, they kept the project secret for a number of years. The Z3 was BMW's first mass-produced roadster for about 30 years at that point, and it was also the company's first car to be made entirely outside of Germany. In fact, the Z3 was wholly assembled in the US, and, well, its American roots were borne out by the fact it was a bit soft, a bit lethargic, and was subject to some crappy product placement. That was at least until the M division got their hands on the Z3 a couple years into the car's life cycle, and significantly elevated both the car's performance and its reputation. Simply called the M Roadster, it was a prototype version of that car that served as the basis of this V12 project from M GmbH. The story goes that BMW were on a mission to prove that all of their engines could fit in all of their different chassis, and that theory was pushed to the extremes here. Duly getting hold of their biggest production engine at the time, the 5.4 litre M73 unit from the 850Ci, they found that lengthways, it actually fit surprisingly well into the front of the Z3. Granted, it was a bit of a tight squeeze, but with some modifications everything did all fit in the end, and resplendent in its Kyalami orange paintwork over a blue leather interior, this prototype certainly looked the part too. Which begs the question, why did BMW wait 13 years to show the prototype publicly? Quite a few reasons, actually. Unsurprisingly, with the bigger engine, the car gained some weight, tipping the scales at 1400 kilograms. Sure, that's not massively heavy, but 70% of that weight was over the front axle, which had some fairly disastrous consequences. Prior to 2012, the only people to have any knowledge of the car outside of BMW were from German magazine Auto Zeitung, who got to drive the sole prototype back in 1999. And they reported that the V12 Z3 would spin its wheels in a dead straight line on a bone-dry track in third gear. And despite the suspension being reinforced compared with a standard M Roadster, suffered chronic understeer in the corners. It also didn't have traction control, leading a BMW engineer to brand the car complete overkill. Maybe it was lucky then that anyone brave enough to have driven the car needed only cling on for about 15 minutes before needing to stop because the dual ECU setup had overheated and needed to be sprayed cool again. A quote-unquote safety feature that is very reminiscent of classic British sports cars. Then there was the performance. Obviously intended for a luxury car, the V12 was rated at 326 horsepower, a measly 5 more than the straight 6 made in the regular M Roadster. It did make significantly more torque, but due to the prototype's added weight, it was actually slower to 60 miles an hour and failed to even make up that deficit over a standing kilometre. Oh, and the oil pan basically scraped the floor the entire time. Perhaps a lesson that just because you can doesn't mean you should. Love it or loathe it, the BMW X5 was one of the most important cars in the brand's history, and a pretty influential one in general, helping to popularise the school-run luxury SUV segment. Mercedes may have beat them to the party, but with its unibody construction and ultimate driving machine tagline to live up to, the X5 was the first to drive like a proper car. Meanwhile, just before the turn of the century, BMW had mounted a rather successful assault on the upper echelons of motorsport, winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1999 with their V12 LMR. You know where this is going, don't you? Yes, in a bid to kill two birds with one stone, BMW would celebrate their Le Mans victory and in turn promote their new sports activity vehicle by shoving the 6.1 litre V12 from the aforementioned Le Mans prototype into the front of the X5. That engine had previous too, also being used in the McLaren F1 GTR that had itself previously won Le Mans in 1995. Both of those cars, in race trim, made about 580 to 600 horsepower thanks to the air restrictors that they were required to run. Restrictors that the X5 LM didn't need, so it made more like 700 horsepower. And it sounded ungodly. Now when a 700 horsepower SUV is revealed these days, we just call that a Tuesday, but 25 years ago it was as bonkers as it was completely out of left field. With its wide arch stance, gaping vent in the bonnet and BBS LM wheels, I see what you did there BMW, there was no mistaking it for an ordinary X5. And part of the reason for that body kit was to accommodate the massive 315 section tyres fitted on all four corners of the car. It was also lowered by 30mm compared to a standard X5 and remained 4-wheel drive, but don't think for a second that this was an easy thing to pilot on the limit, because by all accounts it was anything but. The fact it was functional at all is a minor miracle of course, but for the car's publicity tour, BMW only offered passenger rides to members of the motoring press, and scaring them witless behind the wheel was German racing driver and 2-time Le Mans winner Hans Stuck. Without any passengers adding to the X5 LM's 2.1 tonne curb weight however, Stuck managed to wreak Newtonian havoc for one 7-minute and 49-second lap of the Nürburgring Nordschleife, reaching 193 miles an hour on the back straight, and in the process setting an unofficial SUV lap record at the track, one that would stand for almost 20 years. Sure, that lap was done on slick tyres, but broadly the prototype was very X5-like, as was BMW's intention. The dashboard would be familiar with anyone with the road car, and back seats were sometimes present. The 6-speed manual gearbox was from the company parts bin too, once again coming from a V12 powered 8 series, which could just about handle the 531 foot-pounds of torque. I say just about because full throttle couldn't be used in first or second gear, lest the driveline shatter into a million pieces. Don't ask BMW how they know. Even so, the X5 LM could still reach 60 miles an hour from a standstill in 4.7 seconds. Of course the car was just a marketing stunt, but it paved the way for future Go Faster X5s and the segment as a whole. Whether that's a good thing or not, I'll leave up to you, but no matter how stupid you think the modern crop of fast SUVs are, in this case I think most people can get behind the insanity of the X5 Le Mans. It's so wrong, it might just be right. Okay, you got me. Technically this isn't a BMW, but they made the engine, so it counts, alright? And furthermore, it allows me to wrap this video up in a nice little bow by returning from whence we came. And that is BMW's continued flirtations with the idea of a V16 power plant. Because third time's the charm or something. Rolls-Royce and BMW had previously worked together in the aeroplane engine business, but in 1998 the Germans finally acquired the car company, after a protracted battle with Volkswagen. And the first Rolls-Royce under BMW stewardship was the 7th generation Phantom, which of course would end up using a BMW-derived 6.75 litre V12. A fine engine for sure, but BMW did consider a bespoke V16 for the Phantom. In fact, they went as far as to make a few examples of this 9 litre V16 that you see here, one of which found its way into the 100EX concept car, created to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Mr. Rolls seeing Mr. Royce from across the bar and really liking his vibe. Stylistically, both this concept and the 101EX that followed it were pretty close previews of the eventual Phantom drop-head convertible, but that car in its production form would stick with the 453 horsepower V12 of the regular Phantom, as an increasingly eco-conscious BMW parent company decided that the V16 was maybe just a step too far. Rolls-Royce were extremely cagey about the specs of the engine as well, so figures vary anywhere from 600 to 770 horsepower and from 700 to 1100 pounds-feet of torque. One shudders to think of the fuel bill. But anyway, that was the end of that then, right? Well, not exactly. Enter Rowan Atkinson. He owned a regular Phantom and was quite clearly rather fond of it, as he racked up over 80,000 miles in his, which must have been playing in the back of his mind when he needed a car for his character Johnny English to play in the upcoming film sequel. And, after asking very nicely, Rolls-Royce graciously allowed that 9-litre V16 to be used in Johnny English's custom Phantom, which was based on the 101 EX, essentially a hard-topped version of the same concept. But in any case, it would give that incredible leviathan of an engine one last little bit of time in the spotlight.
Rolls has fitted one of their experimental engines, the 9-litre V16. Goes like the wind, only quieter.